And what is your, what's the problem there?
There's not, I just have to switch from closed to open.
Okay,
It's ready.
okay.
Okay, so as Mike alluded to, my name is Matt with PFM and I'm familiar with most all of you. And the city engaged PFM back in February of 2022 to kind of help walk through the CIWW consideration. And so I have a slide deck here. We presented to the council in March of 2022. At that time, it was still very early in the process. The first 2080 draft had just come out. I met with the finance committee back in April and we went through some of the detail. And at that time, it was, the direction from the finance committee that we would bring this to the council in a workshop type setting. And so I'm going to try to talk really fast through it because this is a ton of information. And I know you guys have another agenda item here to get to before the council meeting. And so at any time, if there's questions, please stop me and kind of dig in further. And I can come back as often as needed. This is a big decision for the city. The city will be asked to look at a 2080, potentially sign a 2080 agreement that, in the context of these agreements, these are 50, 100-year type commitments that the city will make on the water supply of the future. So they're not to be taken lightly. And there's a lot of work that's gone into them. So I'm just going to kind of dive right in. This timeline I think is helpful. I talked about a couple of these dates, February came out. They asked for comments back by May. The city provided comments on May 12th. Those are being considered. We expect that the next version of the 2080 will come out in September. And then from what I've heard in conversations is they're trying to get to an execution version of this document that cities can potentially consider this year yet or by the end of this year. The commencement date that's being proposed is January 1 of 2025. That's when asset transfer would occur. That's when you would switch from buying your water from Des Moines Waterworks to buying it from Central Iowa Waterworks. Any questions on the timeline or any of that?
How long you said the agreement could be? 50 years?
It's a 2080, so I don't know that it has a defined end point. I think it's an intergovernmental agreement. The operating contracts typically have an end point, so 20 years or 40 years is being discussed right now. They do get revised, like the WRA agreement would be an example that was signed in 2004. There was a second amended version of that in 2014. So the WRA at least is on a 10-year cycle to have that reviewed and edited to kind of keep it fresh. But I don't know that they come with an end date that I'm just, when I said 50 to 100 years, I think that puts something into perspective as opposed to, you're doing a project with another governmental entity that kind of has an end date. This really doesn't have an end date. It's a pretty big decision for the city. Okay, so the financial assumptions, I'll kind of run through these. These are important financial assumptions that are in the model. And this is how the costs are allocated. I'm focused very specifically on things that cost money. So which parts of the 2080 have a cost to the city of Johnston? There's a lot of other parts of the 2080 that I'm not commenting on as part of this workshop. They don't have a direct cost to the city. So this mandatory rate setting principles, in my opinion, this is the backbone of the 2080 from a financial perspective. This says how costs are going to be allocated to the member communities. And so, for instance, if you go across the top, the base costs, those costs are going to be allocated on average day. The extra capacity costs are going to be allocated on maximum day. So think about average day is how much water do we purchase for the whole year? And then think about max day is how much do we purchase on our peak day? And so it recognizes who uses the system consistently throughout the year, who has higher peak days throughout the year. System capacity is what you've signed up for. How much of the system have you purchased? How much system capacity do you own? And then the member agency specific expansion costs are, really what do you think you're going to need out in the future? And so as the region has to build more water production, what the city decides is its growth needs, it will then relay that to Central Iowa Water Works. Central Iowa Water Works will build that capacity for each member community and then charge you back based on what you say you need. So the way it's currently modeled is what percentage of the region's growth does Johnston make up? So those are the growth costs, and those are just specific to the expansion of capacity. So then down the left, you can see the different types of cost, the variable cost, the fixed cost, organizational costs, joint capital, and joint capital is broken into both debt service funded and cash funded. And think about joint costs as what does it take to maintain all the assets of the system the way they exist today? So that's what the joint costs are. The shared growth costs is there's 9% of the growth costs are going to be allocated to everybody. 9%, 91% of the growth costs are going to be allocated to those communities that need it. And so there was a lot of debate on this aspect of it early on. What kept coming up in the conversation was like when Fluor went down, the fact that AC Ward could send water into Des Moines to help with the Fluor plant being flooded and not. So as the region builds more water producing assets out on the perimeter, it helps everybody regardless of if you're growing, mainly due to the redundancy within the system. And so, there from Urbandale and West Des Moines perspective, they felt like, Des Moines should share in the cost of the expansion, even if they're not directly benefiting from the growth. And that's where that 9%. And then towards the bottom, you've got how is it going to be charged? And I think this is a very, very, very important aspect of this, where currently today, you only buy water if you've sold water. So somebody turns their faucet on, send them a gallon of water, you instantaneously buy that from Des Moines. So it's one for one. If you buy it, you sold it.
So, and Matt, when you're talking about in residential or business users in the city of Johnston.
That's right. Yeah.
So we're basically, whatever water we're buying from Des Moines Water Works as the city of Johnston, we're passing that on to whoever and it's just, you're charged on a per unit basis.
That's right. Okay. Yep. There is some water loss in the city system, and that's typical, but what's important is just that, you don't incur the cost of buying that water unless somebody consumes that water in your city. Under this scenario, the base cost will stay under that methodology. You'll pay based on how much you use or how much you sell, but the fixed costs are going to be transferred to the city, and you'll pay those whether you sell the water or not. And so in years that are really wet, where you don't have as much irrigation sales, then your per unit cost will be a lot higher. But in years that are really dry, where you have a lot of irrigation sales and you have a lot more sales, the fixed costs will be there and they won't change whether you use a lot of water or not a lot of water, and then you'll divide it by a bigger number. And so you'll have a lower unit cost. And so that transfers the risk of carrying the fixed costs from Des Moines, to the city of Johnston. And that's the big win that Des Moines Water Works gets out of all of this, is that they're transferring some of that fixed cost. But the benefit for you is that you don't have to, right now, Des Moines Water Works builds that into their their formula. I mean, they've got to be able to pay their bills, whether it's a wet year or dry year. So they have to inflate their rates thinking that it'll be a wet year every year. So you pay those higher rates, whether you buy a lot of water or not. Under this scenario, you will benefit, you'll have a lower unit cost in drier years, essentially. So this is very important, and I don't know that this is going to change much. I mean, it's been reviewed by PFM. They've made the changes that I've requested. FCS is the other consultant that they had hired, and then Raftellus. So I think it's in really good shape. I think it's fair, it's equitable, and it's important. In my opinion, it's the most important table in the whole 2080. So, any other questions on that?
So Matt, PFM has been doing work on behalf of Des Moines Waterworks, or Central Iowa Waterworks as part of this process too. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so West Des Moines Waterworks hired PFM for the benefit of Central Iowa Waterworks to review and build a financial model that allocates out the costs. And so we've been meeting with every community as part of that and sharing or with West Des Moines, and then that would be paid, our contract would be paid for by Central Iowa Waterworks. So, and we've disclosed that to the city and all the other cities that, and really, I feel like our responsibility is to make sure it's being fair and equitably allocated, the costs are, but yeah. Okay, so this is, currently these are the production costs that are in the city. They're in the financial models. I had sent out to all of the potential members back in May, kind of the allocation of these costs. And so, you know, this is based on the 2023 budget. So this is what represents calendar year 2025 in my models. And what you can see here is this, you know, if you go to the bottom right, that's 43.5 million. I think that's kind of the number that I would draw your attention to. I mean, that's what the operating cost of all of these communities are that are currently producing water. And so if you go all the way to the bottom row, you know, Des Moines Waterworks, their budget for operating and maintenance is 35 million. If you divide that by the 17.7 billion gallons that they expect to produce, that they produce water at about $1.98 per thousand. West Des Moines is very close to that at $1.99 per thousand. Altoona is producing water at $2.33 per thousand. Grimes is at $3.34. And so the blended rate of all of these communities would be about $2.04 per thousand. And this just covers the O&M expense. So, you know, it converges to what Des Moines is because Des Moines makes up such a big portion of it. But it's important to know that all of these entities, if they participate, would be water producers, and you would pay, you know, a blended rate. So all of the costs go in, get allocated back out. And so, you know, like if you're Altoona, they were going to sell their water to Central Iowa Waterworks at $2.33 per thousand, and they're going to buy it back at $2.04. Des Moines Waterworks is going to sell their water at $1.98 to Central Iowa Waterworks and buy it back at $2.04, based on the blended approach. So this is an important, these are the input costs currently. And I would anticipate that as they get into the 24 budget and the chemical costs go up and labor costs are higher and all of the things that go into a budget season that, you know, at some point next spring, you know, we'll have updated numbers once, you know, Des Moines, West Des Moines, they're in their budget process right now.
So Matt, I'm just curious, Grimes is at 334. That's what they would be selling their water into the system and then buying it back for 204.
Yep, that's right.
So why is theirs so high?
Yeah, they don't have any staff that runs their water. They contract with US Water. And so they do have that contract. They have a newer plant. There's a different technology that they're using that, and then they also built their plant bigger than what they need it for today so that they can expand into that. You know, I do think that part of what will happen with Central Iowa Waterworks is maybe Grimes would look to West Des Moines or Des Moines to run their plant and not necessarily hire US Water to, if there's cost saving potential there, there's.
So will those cost savings then in the future be passed on to us?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Yep. All of the costs will be incurred by the region and all of the cost will be,
Well, these are just current numbers.
just
It
based
can
on
change.
their current
Okay.
budget. And then the other thing is specifically Altoona, Grimes and Polk City, they just presented their budget saying, this is what we allocate our public works department to water. That's probably going to be scrutinized.
Yeah.
They want to pay for any more than they have to. And so, but this is currently what's being assumed. But I would anticipate that those costs get looked at really closely and justified and, all of that.
And one thing to point out, the producers, they're going to be reimbursed their actual cost plus a 2% markup for basically the headache of producing that water. So that's something to keep in mind.
And is that reflected in these costs and the 2%?
It is, yeah.
Is the 91% of kind of the burden of growth costs also included then in those fixed costs?
It's not. So these are actual operating and maintenance costs.
Okay.
It's the cost of producing 21.3 billion gallons of water each year.
Okay.
So it's energy costs, chemical costs, lime residuals, all the things it takes to produce that.
This is a dumb question, and I'm going to preface it as that is, but can any of these producers at present make up for some of those other producers? In other words, getting back to the mayor's question about, boy, Grimes produces at a high rate. Is it necessary for them to be producing water if a West Des Moines or a Des Moines Waterworks at the moment can produce water and enough water, 654,000 gallons to be, or kilogallons to be able to cover that?
Yeah, so I think the answer is relatively complicated because it's where can the water be produced and then where it's needed. So, I don't think Grimes is connected to the whole region right now. But for instance, Polk City produces $82 million out of a well that they just have maintained for a long time. It makes up about
82.
82 million gallons.
Oh, I thought you said $1 million. Okay.
Million gallons, yep,
Okay.
82 million gallons a year. It makes up about 40% of their water, but they get the rest of their water from Des Moines. So somebody could decide that's inefficient, just shut that well down and we'll just send you the water at $1.98 instead of you paying $2.20. So, but that's more of an engineering question, I would say, but I would say over time, then I think and Des Moines runs into this all the time. When they're having issues with water quality on the Raccoon River or the Des Moines River, they switch up where they're producing water at based on constraints from a water quality perspective. And so we just expanded, I think, from the Des Moines to but a lot of it has to do with where is the water needed and how much can we get to where it's needed at.
All right, thank you.
Yep. So this is what's in the model. These numbers will continue to change and evolve, but I think it's a good representation of kind of where things are currently. So debt service, currently West Des Moines has an SRF loan. Grimes has about $30 million worth of SRF funding. And then the rest of the projects are the Saylorville treatment plant expansion, as well as there's an expansion for Altoona. That could be Altoona or Grimes, depending on what the tech committee decides. And then I think the big one out there in 2035 is there's a $600 million plant that's more of a placeholder than anything else. The technical advisory committee has been meeting monthly, and I know Matt's been part of that. And they're trying to determine, is that one big 25 MGD expansion? Is that 2 or 3 different plants? Where does that go? I think the nice part about where Johnston is located physically is the Saylorville treatment plant is right there, and all the transmission has to go west. So they'll be running water, directly through Johnston as part of almost every expansion, to get the water from Saylorville out west. So you should benefit from that in the sense that, there's not additional transmission projects that you have to pay for by yourselves as they're doing those projects. So, but anyway,
So Matt, I just want to make sure I understand. So basically, there, at some point, it's expected that there'll be a $25 million gallon expansion,
yeah.
million gallon, not dollar, but million gallon expansion. And at least some of that will likely occur at Saylorville.
So the next expansion is a 10 MGD expansion, and that is planned at Saylorville. And so that's currently under design. I mean, it's part of the 2080. And so the 25 MGD is being discussed. I think Des Moines thinks they can continue to expand at Saylorville. And then there's some questions on, do we need to do something on the Raccoon River? If Altoona is going to continue to grow, do we need something out there? If Bondurant participates or not participates, do we need to do something along the Skunk River?
Yeah, so it's not necessarily part of that 25 million, but it's likely.
Yeah,
I mean,
I mean,
the-
the drawings that Des Moines has for the $25 million expansion has it at Saylorville and has a big transmission.
Okay.
So Matt, when you say that we will benefit from that, will that be pipe that is put in a route that we would otherwise be putting some water main or water pipes in for some reason? And then will we be able to draw off of it?
Yeah, to my understanding, and I'm not an engineer and I don't
Right.
all of that stuff gets together, but I know that there's a lot of heartburn right now for like Altoona and some others that, yeah, I can sign up for Central Iowa Water Works, but you physically can't get me the water that I'm paying for to have because it's at the plant. And now like Altoona has to run a pipe back from their city limits back into the Des Moines system to find a big enough transmission line to hook to get certain amount of water there. And I think, just the proximity of where Johnston is, where the expansions are located, they're going to by default have to run, lines through Johnston. And so I think you would benefit from the fact that it's not like they're building it down at Moffett and you got to figure out how to
Get it all the way up here.
get it up here by yourself. So
Matt, can I ask a question? And I apologize if it seems stupid or takes us backwards just a little bit. But why isn't Urbandale part of this? I know they have some of their own water, but so does this Grimes and Polk City. So why isn't Urbandale part of the Central Iowa Water?
yeah,
Works?
they are.
Well, they are.
Yeah,
I hadn't seen them listed in here, so I was like,
they're not
why
a
don't
water
I-
producer, but you can see here that Urbandale, UWU, Urbandale owns some of the queries.
Quarries.
So they have
Or is-
they have some storage capacity, but they're not producing. Is that?
Urbandale buys 100% of their water from Des Moines Water Works.
Okay.
They happen to own the quarries because they were considering building a plant of their own. And I spent many hours working through with them. Should we join Central Iowa Water Works? Should we build their own plant? And their board had decided to move forward with these discussions. They've been part of the micro group. They're very much at the table.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so Grimes's big consideration is if they can transfer their debt to Central Iowa, then they can transfer their assets, then they're likely to participate. If they can't transfer their debt and their assets, then there's some legal challenges for them to join. So that's, but these are my debt assumptions. I've built in future, I could get into a lot of detail here, but like the Grimes's debt is at 2%. IFA just is increasing their rates October 1st. We don't want to have to pay 3% on $30 million. So we're trying to figure out a way that IFA can just pass those debts to Central Iowa Water Works and not have to do a reissuance and do such. So, and then all the future ones I have in here at 3%, which recognizes the increase to the SRF rates. From a capital perspective, the top group is the regional cost. And so these are, what's it take to maintain the existing infrastructure, and based on Des Moines Waterworks CIP to maintain the existing infrastructure, it's like 17 million the first year. It gets up to about 23 million. And then it drops down to 5.8. But in my models, I've kind of left that at 23 because I know enough to know that CIPs 5 years out just haven't been thought through well enough in detail. And so about $23 million a year in capital projects that would be cash funded with rates. The expansion section is mainly the small expansion at Altoona, and then also the Des Moines Waterworks is the Saylorville treatment plant expansion. If you add up all those numbers, it's close to 160 million. That would be debt financed. And so total capital, 47 million the first year, about 65 million out there in 2025. Just for comparison purposes, Central Iowa Waterworks is about twice the size of WRA. So if you think about WRA's capital plan and costs, WRA has a $26 million operating budget. Central Iowa Waterworks has a $45 million operating budget. WRA has about $1 billion in their capital plan. Central Iowa Waterworks, depending how far out you go, somewhere in the tune of $2 to $3 billion is what the capital is. So I put it in twice the size of WRA.
And is that capital plan all related to water production? I mean, for instance, like does Des Moines Waterworks, they own all the water infrastructure in the city of Des Moines, correct?
That is correct. Yeah.
So will Central Iowa Waterworks now also own all the,
So
will that go back to the
every
city?
member community would own their own distribution network.
Okay.
The pipes that get it from Fluor Drive to the city of Johnston, I mean, there's what they call core network that are currently being maintained by the purchase capacity members. Those would be owned by Central Iowa Waterworks, those assets. And there's a big, long list of assets where you can see what's included, what's not included in terms of the assets. But I like to think about it as, anything that they're going to get the water to Johnston, and then all of the water mains within the city of Johnston. But then you'll also own a percentage of all of the different plants.
Yeah, and I'm very comfortable with that setup. I just want, and I'm actually not, there's nothing that I'm not uncomfortable with, but I'm just trying to kind of figure out, I know it's, not every city is the same sort of going into it. So will we be more similar kind of on the back end?
Yeah,
Sounds
I
like
would
we
think
would.
so. Yeah. They're through the asset transfer process. And I know I've got 15 minutes. Mike, how we doing from a
You just
time
keep
perspective? Okay.
Matt, though, before you move past that, or actually on that chart, is that 2027? Is that where you said we just don't have CIP confidence enough out that far?
I just don't
'cause-
trust it going from 17 million. If you go across
Yeah.
17, 20.7, 23, call it 23, 5.8. It's not going to go to 5.8. It's going to be something closer to 23.
Okay.
million.
Thank you.
And it might not be all the way at 23 million, but for my planning purposes, I'm going to keep it at that.
All right, thanks.
Okay, so the way the allocations work is that it's going to be a 5-year look back historically. So for the previous 5 years, we'll take a 5-year average, and then that will be your annual demand. So for Johnston, in this graph, you can see that in 2018, you purchased 748 million, then 762, then 820, 870, and 822. For purposes of the cost allocation, you would pay 804. 804 would be your number, and you would divide that into the 21.177 billion gallons, and that would be your percentage. So this is annual demand. This is max day demand. So, back in 2018, and that number is green because there was some debate around it, and I think it'll be updated in the next version. I mean, the nice part is by the time this gets adopted, 2018 will not factor into the numbers. But I think there was a software error on your max day back then. And so we'll take out that 5.8 and it'll be a little bit lower. But if you go all the way to the right, your average is essentially 5.1 million gallons of the 106. And then this is system capacity. So it starts with your 5-year average, max day demand. And then based on the 2017 long range plan, that's how they're allocating the reserve capacity as well as the expansion at Saylorville. So based on these numbers right now, the capacity of the system is 136.5. The 5-year average max day demand was 106. So if you subtract the 136 minus the 106, you get that 30.399. They have to determine on how to allocate that and who to allocate it to. So then they're allocating it based on the growth percentages that were defined in the 2017 long. So for Johnston, you would buy 4.7% of the reserve capacity. So of that 30.399, Johnston would purchase an additional 1.429. So then you would start the region on day one with 6.523 MGDs. And then when they expand Saylorville, you would buy 4.7% of that, 10 MGDs. That would be 0.7. So you would kind of, the way I've been trying to explain this is if things move forward the way they're projected here, you know, is that enough for Johnston through 2030, 2035? Because the next expansion is going to be 2035. And so if it's not enough, and a lot of other communities are saying that's not enough, then they're going to have to pull forward that next expansion and they're going to have to do some additional expansions. And so, you know, I got an email Friday that's saying that, you know, Bondurant has not been responsive. And so they'd like to take them out of the next version of this. And so, you know, Bondurant essentially, you know, Bondurant has purchase capacity of 1.2. So they will go into, we'll just go into the Des Moines number. You know, they don't just disappear because Des Moines has a legal obligation to serve them through 2045. So their demand will go into the Des Moines number, but some of that reserve capacity will be available then to be redistributed. And so we'll do that. Altoona still needs to decide. And then Xenia and Warren Row Water are the other two that still need kind of it's not a firm commitment, but it's more of we're more in than out. You know, we don't have any known issues with the way things stand right now. So then this table is intended to just kind of show you what percentage, based on those other tables, this is what percentages Johnston makes up. So you make up 3.8% based on average day demand. You make up 4.8% based on max day demand. Your initial capacity is close to 4.8. You can see that your initial capacity down to your total capacity, the percentage goes down a little bit. And I think that's an indication that the thought process is other communities are growing more than you are in terms of a capacity perspective. But those numbers can be adjusted and they'll have to be adjusted. You can tell during a lot of these discussions that, you know, 2017 long range plan, a lot has changed since 2017 for a lot of communities. And it just, Des Moines doesn't have a great way to keep that updated. And so I think there's just there's going to be an effort by Central Iowa Waterworks to have a little bit more systematic, a little bit more robust, you know, figuring out who needs what. And then how do we go about building that?
When you say Des Moines doesn't have it, you're talking about the Des Moines Waterworks?
Waterworks,
Okay.
yeah.
Not the city of Des Moines, but Des Moines
Yeah,
Waterworks.
the
Okay.
Waterworks, yep. So, you know, these asset transfer, I just got an updated list from Des Moines just this morning about their assets as of January 1, 2023. So these book values are as of 2020, I believe. So there's 157 million plus the 27 or 26.5 million of other, Altoona's, Grimes, and then West Des Moines. So of all the assets, there's about 184 million dollars worth of assets. These numbers continue to get updated. I've got Grimes highlighted there. I think Grimes is actually at 5.2. And so that will change. And so these calculate how much, the first one is how much capacity are you currently using? And so you're using your 5-year average max day demand. Johnston is currently using about $6.6 million worth of the $184 million worth of assets based on the current book value. Then if you look at the reserve capacity, how much reserve capacity you'll get allocated, Johnston is looking at $2 million is what purchasing the reserve capacity would cost, 1.49. So then kind of the net position is the 6.6 plus the 2 kind of brings you to the 8.6. These numbers are going to change. And one of the things that I've been working closely with Amy at Des Moines Waterworks is we've got to pick a date that these assets are going to be valued. And then, every year that they add assets and every year that they depreciate assets, adding assets makes it more expensive. Depreciating assets makes it less expensive. And so we have to have a sense, I think communities are going to have a sense going into the 2080. Go up, go down, when do I actually have to pay this? I know Mike and Sarah and Teresa and I met last week. IFA gonna fund, allow this to be an eligible funding source? They said yes originally. There's been some questions since. We need some certainty on that. And so, this will get a lot of attention, I think, over the next, several months in terms of how much is the number? When do we have to pay it? What are the eligible financing mechanisms to fund that? And so.
And Matt, just certainly if IFA through a SRF loan wouldn't fund this, there's other mechanisms to fund it. Just a revenue bond would be one source.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I do in my normal life. Day-to-day job is help cities figure out how to pay for whatever they need to pay for. So yeah, there's definitely ways that the city of Johnston can fund this. I mean, depending on, where the Northwest annexation projects are, there may be cash available in the water fund to help fund this. I mean, there's lots of different ways we can, but, obviously we'll seek the most cost, the lowest cost possible for the interest cost. So.
Matt, I understand when you talk about reserve capacity, that's the 2 million some, I can't see it right now where that is.
Yeah, the 2 million.
2,004,000. Explain to me again, the 6,636,000, isn't that what that's a year's worth of buying water that our community has bought? Is that correct? Is that how you would say that?
Take all of the assets. The book value of the assets that you're buying is $1,324,952. That's the book value of the assets. And so per MGD. And so you're using 5.009 MGDs. So you have to pay $1,324,950 per MGD that you're using. So you multiply the two numbers together, that's where you get the 6,636,685. And for reference, if you could actually go out and buy 5 MGD of a plant for $1.3 million. I mean, it's the next Saylorville expansion is 16 million per MGD, and you're buying it at 1.3 million per MGD. So it's by all accounts the cheapest production capacity you will ever buy. And it's part of what Des Moines Waterworks had to do to make it even can, make Urbandale and make West Des Moines even stay at the table, is bring the cost of their assets down so that they were affordable. So, because if you were gonna go, if you were gonna go build a plant, you're talking, 16 million, 15 to $16 million per MGD. And so, you get into the tens of millions really quickly, if not 50 million.
I think I understand now.
Matt, and I could be way off base here, but in one of our previous conversations, you did allude to the fact, though, that we were in essence, as a city, almost paying in advance or overpaying
Yeah.
in that regard. I don't see any reflection, though, of consideration of that overpayment for future capacity. In other words, that as a good and loyal customer of Des Moines Water Works.
Yeah, and it's certainly something I put in the, discussed, this initial cost of joining does not recognize the capital contribution made over time by paying the with storage rate. I mean, essentially you paid the with storage rate. And it's certainly, there's no question that you did, Des Moines Water Works is going to would be the one. It's not really the other member communities. It's you getting Des Moines Water Works to recognize how much of those assets you essentially funded by paying the higher rate over time. And I know in some discussions and with the finance committee, to some degree, it's kind of like paying for leasing a car. You don't own the car, you pay a higher cost to lease the car, and then at the end of the lease, you don't really owe anything, and so I kind of feel like that's where the city's at. You have the opportunity to buy purchase capacity. There were lots of reasons why you were advised not to, and it was mainly your peak ratio. And it gets relatively complicated because not everybody that bought purchase capacity got the purchase capacity rates. There are some communities that go over their purchase capacity by over 100% and then and they're not getting credit for that additional cost that they paid either. But it is an open discussion item for the city and not factored into the financials. Where you would see it is under this amortized net book value in the Des Moines assets. Johnston has a 0 there. Everybody else that has purchase capacity has their number based on the purchase capacity that they bought. So,
And I know the city, when we made our comments on the second revision, we raised this as a concern. We had a meeting with the core group from CIWW. We've continued to push that. It's kind of in their ballpark to see, or ball court to see if they will acknowledge that at all. I would say during our meetings and discussions, it's something that, like Matt said, you leased a car. That was your choice. You could have bought in and had ownership, but this was the decision. Now, I think our argument has been, you were supposed to charge us basically what your costs of production were. And we know now that your costs were higher. I think the difficult part is, how do you ever calculate that? And that's, we talked to Matt about, could we somehow calculate that? And there's too many calculations that go into it that it's pretty impossible to kind of ascertain what is that value, what's the true cost.
I would assert it's not impossible to calculate that.
the hard part is how much purchase capacity would you have bought? And then you got to look at each year. What was your peak? How much over that? How would your participation in the purchase capacity rate model affected the purchase capacity rate? And so you kind of have to go back in time and then rifle through, and so not impossible, but there are a lot of conditional things that, that one thing affects the other.
Sure.
And you can't really go back and say, well, let's just use the historical rates, because the historical rates might not have been what they were if you would have moved from one category to the other. It would have changed the math on how they.
The part that I've really, excuse me, Councilman Cope, but the part that I really emphasized back when Jim and I went down to Des Moines Waterworks and met with them when this all started was not only about the purchase capacity portion of it, but the fact that they admitted back 2, 3, 4 years ago, I mean, time adds up for me here, but when they did their cost of service study, they flat out put up on the screen in front of all of us that they were charging us 107% of what it really cost them to serve us. That's the number that in my mind, that's when we started really balking and they stopped raising our rates the last several years. If we could ever figure out what that number was, and if they had that methodology used when they did their cost of service studies, because they did do something like that every year, might have been different. That's kind of an argument I would try to make more about, but all those years you were charging us, not only we didn't do the purchase capacity thing, but then you were really were charging us more than you needed to. So Matt and I still talk about it and we'll continue to talk about it. And they certainly know how we feel, but clear back from when Jim and I tried it, there hasn't much movement on their side either. On the
So
issue.
my question is, when you keep talking about, you went down and you met with CIWW. Is CIWW in essence Des Moines Waterworks?
It wasn't.
No, I'm talking specifically about
It's Des Moines Waterworks, Urbandale Waterworks, and West Des Moines Waterworks is kind of the core group that's trying to create CIW. So that would be the group we met with.
Okay.
And I'm talking, it was just
I
Des
understand
Moines
that there's a
Waterworks people
distinction
when
there,
Jim and I went, so.
More at 7 o'clock, and we have more to get to. I can stick around to after.
How much longer do you think you'll need, Matt?
The asset transfer really,
You think you can cover it in 10 minutes? Do we have anybody online, Sam?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I can move through in 10 minutes. This is intended to show the revenue requirements that CIWW is then going to allocate. So it's got all the debt service, all the capital, all the operating. This is the total CIWW. And for, if you look at the bottom here, in year one, 65 million.
What page are you on?
On page 18.
Okay.
And then at the bottom, I usually use the year 5. That's when the Saylorville expansion is kind of fully on board online. It gets up to about $85 million is the budget. And so these are the costs that then get allocated to each community. The Johnston allocations is a similar looking page. And essentially this kind of boils down to, this is just Johnston's allocations. And I do have some rates per 1,000 on here, but the way you pay Des Moines Waterworks now is not how you'll pay Central Iowa Waterworks in the future. The way you'll pay Central Iowa Waterworks in the future is you'll pay the O&M cost. So you'll pay that $2.04 in the first year. It's in green. Now I'm on page 20. I've kind of highlighted in the top green box. And you'll pay that based on the water you buy. And $2.04 to $2.11 is what you would pay now compared to the $4.57 that you pay Des Moines Waterworks now. But then you'll also pay this $199,000, which gets up to $220,000 per MGD of your 5-year max day demand. And it's important in this model that everybody that participates in Central Iowa, Des Moines, Johnston, Altoona, everybody pays those same rates. It's just you have a different dollar cost based on how do you use the system. So what's your max day demand? What's your annual demand? And so the blue I've tried to translate back into dollars that would actually be paid for by the city. And then the two middle blue lines, this is the expansion cost. This is the 9% and the 91%. So you pay 99% on the system capacity that you own. Which is about, the 4.8, 4.7. And then your growth number you pay based on your long-term needs, so for about 4.7. So, when it gets down to the bottom, I like to look at year 5. The rate per thousand based on an estimated, usage that you're currently using would be about $4.06 per thousand compared to the 457 that you're currently paying. This doesn't factor in the asset transfer, and so I kept getting a lot of feedback early on that, hey, this isn't really telling me the whole story. But the asset transfer doesn't necessarily go to Central Iowa Water Works. It goes to Des Moines Water Works, and you have to determine how you fund that. So I did a 20-year SRF loan and payment. That's at the bottom. That's like that 67 cents, but you could choose to pay that off with cash. You could use to do, different things. And so that's kind of down there. And so if you combine the two, it's a little bit higher than the rate, but we're talking 5 years out, so compared to the current rate today. So I still think, from a water, you shouldn't see a shock in your water rates as a result of Central Iowa Water Works. I wouldn't say we want to bring your water rates lower right away, given what we've got going on with Northwest annexation and the infrastructure needs that are up there. But it could be 3 or 4 years in, we decide, we've been freezing the rates for the last couple of years in the water fund. We could potentially continue to freeze them or lower them, as a result of Central Iowa Water Works. But I would really want to kind of make sure we've accounted for everything as we kind of go further down the road. But I would say that's the executive summary, is that you should expect less pressure on your water rates as a result of Central Iowa Water Works, as opposed to, and the alternative at this point is, I don't know what the alternative is, to be honest. Finding another water source and building your own water plant. So.
Matt, a couple of questions for you real quickly, and I do want to be sensitive of time. First, if we were to do an SRF loan, at what rate did you estimate that?
I put them
3?
all in at 3%
Okay.
from here.
And then the follow-up is, jog my memory as to what's our current rate per 1,000 gallons?
Hey, Des Moines Water Works 457 currently.
And then did you, using these same models as far as projected growth, try to estimate out what rates might be for us 5 years from now?
yeah,
I
so-
realize we can't stay the same, but I do want to kind of put that in perspective.
Yeah, a couple thoughts on this. You pay Des Moines Water Works about 3.6 million a year, depending on how much water you buy. You also have about 2.1 million of fixed costs of like staff costs that you have to fund out of your water rate. So buying water isn't your only expense within the water fund. But in this model, this category right here, this 457, they never instituted this 471 increase. But out in 2029, I have your purchase. What we're planning on in our rate setting model is that your purchase, the cost of buying water from one water works would go to like 546, just based on their historical trends and what they've been doing with their rates. Since Teresa so eloquently pointed out that the city was being overcharged, based on their cost of service, they've really dialed back, and they haven't instituted a rate increase to the city of Johnston since 2020, and so, but this is what we have in your model. And, most of the rates that we're projecting up here for this 4.5 is really to fund, these annexation improvements that are in the CIP currently. So they're not as much related to the Des Moines Water Works increases, although it all factors in. It's all,
Matt, Mike, and Teresa, as I think about this, what would be helpful to me in the future? We have these discussion items here that we still need to, have a lot of conversation and information presented to us about. But, I'm thinking ahead to how we explain to our residents the ultimate decision that we make. And I think what would be helpful for me, and maybe the other council members, is kind of a, because you've been so involved in this, put together, the list of pros, the list of cons, and what the alternatives are. And, recognizing there may not be any realistic alternative, but at least tease those out so that when we talk to residents, we can say, well, we could have done this. That didn't make sense. We could have done this. That didn't make sense. We could have done this. That didn't make sense. So just kind of build our arguments for us.
I would just say, a couple of questions I would have is, so it sounds like at some point we may have to come up with $8 million. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah.
And to me, is there a way for us to be able to come up with that $8 million without that $8 million having to come out of our CIP? That would be, to me, that would be something I would like to strive for. Now, I got to understand what the pros and cons are, but that would be
You say come out of your CIP.
our debt levy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't anticipate it would.
this,
come out
this
of
would be
your-
a revenue debt issuance, not a
Okay.
geo debt.
And I think to add to what Councilman Copa said, just what are the options for paying for
Right,
that
right,
$8
right,
million?
right, yeah. And then I guess the other thing, and this is probably a question more for Mike, but what's the governance model looking as we move forward on whatever this new organization looks like? Because in the old days, it was just the city of Des Moines. Now we have this sort of city of Des Moines, Urbandale, West Des Moines governance. And that's probably better, but I don't know. And I presume we're heading to hopefully a governance model that maybe
I would say
we have
it's,
somebody more at the table who represents specifically Johnston's interests, but I don't know. And that's an important issue that clearly is outside of your scope, Matt, but I think is important that I kind of want to get a handle on.
what I would say, it's very similar to the WRA. Every community is going to have a seat at the larger board. Now, there is an executive board, and initially there's a little bit more weight towards Des Moines Waterworks, Urbandale, and West Des Moines, since, they're kind of the big three.
And I guess here's my question. Why does Urbandale, who doesn't have a water treatment plant, doesn't provide any treated water, why do they get a seat at the table when they're not?
And I can't answer that.
I think that's an
question.
important question that to me, it's sort of historical, but I'm kind of struggling with it a little bit.
Yeah, I think the reason, and just from my observation, the reason they did that, water, they have a water utility. So the general manager for Urbandale just does water. Christina from West Des Moines just does water. Dale just does water. So I think they felt like this was such a nuanced process. Those three entities had resources to contribute to the nitty gritty detail. I think the big governance model will have representation. They've called it the micro group to kind of keep things moving forward. But I don't think anybody who's wanted to be more involved has been able to be more involved in some of those discussions. But I think that's kind of how that started, was that is those three water utilities felt like they had more resources.
Well, I clearly can understand why Des Moines and West Des Moines, they are provided treated water to the system. I don't see Urbandale doing that. And so to me, again, I think something that needs further exploration.
And I know that structure where Urbandale has a seat, like written in the 2080, that's a short-term period that they get that. And then it goes to more of a rotating model after that. But those are well taken.
Yeah, we've had a lot of discussions across the region around governing bodies, and I think.
Well, this is
that-
the first time we've talked about this for quite a while. So I think that's for us, for the rest of us who aren't part of those conversations.
Yeah, I'm not
it's-
talking specifically about this issue. I'm just saying, in terms of DART and MPO and other regional organizations, we've had lots of conversations around the governance structure. And so it will not come as any surprise to
To
them.
anyone, yeah.
That's right, that we want to make sure that we get it right.
One thing I wanted to clarify early on, I know Councilmember Reddy asked about the length of term, and I had to go look at it. So there is an initial 40-year length of term written in the current draft. And then at the end of 40 years, if 2/3 of the members say we want to extend it, pretty much automatically extended for another 40 years. So I think to Matt's point, he's exactly right, where this is a long-term 50, 100-year agreement, but there are length of terms in the agreement. Additionally, the city may opt at any point to withdraw with a 5-year notice. Now, withdrawing, you lose basically any of the capital inputs that you put into it. So, we're talking about an $8 million investment. If we decide 5 years later to withdraw, you're going to lose that investment.
And I would just add one other additional point of something that I would like to have a better understanding is to what extent Xenia has a continuing relationship with this new entity and how long that relationship will last and how do we view that as especially in light of obviously our own issues that we went through with Xenia, but also Xenia and Granger and all that. So I think we need to have a better understanding of exactly how do we ensure that if Xenia is going to be a beneficiary of an agreement that we're a part of, that they truly act in an appropriate way. And that for me, I've not been assured of that yet. So I want to get some assurances on that.
Understand? We can have those discussions. And we have had those discussions.
Yeah, but we have that, it's something it'd be helpful for us to be kind of understand how those are going, so.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it. I know that we'll continue to have these conversations. We have one remaining item on the work session, and I assume we can pick that up at the end of the regular meeting under
Yes, Mayor.
city manager comments. Okay, well, why don't we go ahead then and adjourn the work session, and we'll just roll right in to the regular city council.